I do not have the detailed agenda in front of me.
I can send it over, Jay.
I'm sure it's in my email somewhere, but yeah, if you could send that to me, that would be great.
And I'm gonna go look for Anne.
Here we go. Okay, I found it. All right, y'all, we have a quorum, so I'm going to go ahead and get this meeting started. I would like to call the meeting to order. The Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is October 17th at 4:18 p.m. This is a virtual meeting. We ask that you mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone, and that you only use the chat function to request to speak. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio. And I will do the roll call now. Maggie Amato-Tellez.
Present.
Wendy Asher.
Present, sorry, it's on the phone, a little tricky.
It's okay. Marianne Bierling. I believe she is absent. Mindy Bernstein.
Present.
Oh, Mindy's here. Hey, Mindy.
Hi, Jay.
Mark Clark.
He excused himself.
Okay. Vicky Cusino.
Here.
Serena Warake. Lori Mazurba.
Present.
Tisha Tallman.
She excused herself.
Jim Toffel.
He also excused himself.
Ray Winch.
Present.
Kenny Wong.
Present.
And Jay Young. That is me. So that makes 8 by my count. So I think we're 1+ with the quorum. Ex officio members, Ann Chineka.
Here, present.
And Corin Manning.
Present.
Betty Villegas. Marcos Ismael. And Michael Edmonds.
I am present.
All right. The next item for business is to approve the September minutes. Are there any updates or changes to the minutes? If there are not, I would entertain a motion to approve the September minutes.
I'll move. This is Maggie.
Thanks, Maggie. Can I get a second?
I will second that. It's Mindy.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no or nay. Any abstentions? All right, the September minutes are approved. At this point, let me see. I think we're good to go with the call to the audience. The call to the audience is limited to 3 minutes per speaker and a total of 10 minutes. All speakers must share their name to be recorded in the meeting minutes. And remember that the call to the audience may not result in discussion with members of the commission. No legal action may take place during the call to the audience, and speakers may not be disruptive. CEHD members may only respond to criticism and request that items be placed on a future agenda for discussion. And finally, members of the audience may still participate on agenda items as per the bylaws of CEHD. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak?
No hand is up.
Okay, moving right along, we are crushing it on time so far, guys. So good, since we've got a little bit of a shorter meeting. So from here, next on the agenda is the HCD update. That's you, Ann.
Yeah, thanks all. My internet keeps cutting out, so apologies if I go blank for a bit. It seems to come right back in. But just heads up there. One, I asked to go early. I will have to leave the Old Pueblo Community Services Housing First Resource Center ribbon cutting is today, so I'll be leaving for that. So thank you for accommodating me early on the agenda. A couple HCD updates. One is we did host a environmental meeting, public meeting for the South 10th project 2 weeks ago now, I want to say. And so you all have been hearing about that project. And I do think at some point we'll do kind of a more comprehensive agenda item on where we're at and what that project is. But we did host an environmental meeting, which was really aimed at trying to address concerns we've heard regarding environmental conditions. And so we had environmental and general services there to talk about the studies that have been done, as well as Terracon, an outside consulting firm that has done a lot of the work on South 10th. It was decently attended and would say, I think, helped address many concerns, but not all concerns. There were some takeaway requests and items that HCD has been working on. But we had that meeting a couple of weeks ago. Earlier this week, thanks to some people on this call, and I'll give Manisha a big shout out here, we submitted our Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing grant. And really that grant is, really trying to continue to focus on ways to encourage more housing development. So working with planning and development services, as well as Pima County and University of Arizona and Arches, really trying to look at how to look at the regulatory environment, zoning environment, and also some of the other barriers to housing development. So we submitted that this week, fingers crossed. And then in terms of upcoming items, next week we'll be going to mayor and council for the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. That is an agenda item, so I won't go into too much detail on that. And then coming up next month, we will have a Sugar Hill on Stone meeting, a follow-up meeting from the public meeting we had before. And then one other update I did want to make sure you all are aware of. At next week's, I'm bringing up a document. At next week's mayor and council meeting, at the regular session, the very last item will be, I think it's the last item, is talking about the truth in taxation. So this is more details regarding the Safe and Vibrant City sales tax. And so I wanted to make sure there's a document that's part of the public materials for that item that gives more detail about each of the items listed in the sales tax initiative. And so we'll make sure to send out that link to everyone. But wanted you all as the commission to know there are a couple items that are listed where the commission has been incorporated into what that process will look like for allocating funding. And so the first one is the gap financing pool. And so as you all know, we've been incorporating the commission last year with the through the PCHIP grant making process. This would essentially mirror that process where the gap financing would go into the city's housing trust fund. This is something that I know the commission has really been asking us to reinstate that trust fund. That money would go into the trust fund, and then there would be an application process, a transparent application process that the commission would ultimately recommend projects to mayor and council for approval. And so wanted to sort of, through hearing feedback throughout the past couple of years, really felt like that was the most transparent and equitable way to distribute that funding and really take advantage of the expertise you all have on this commission. So that's for one of the items. The second item that I anticipate a similar process, there is funding for what's called resiliency for renters. And there's now a link in the chat there where similarly landlords who rent to low to affordable and workforce housing could apply for funding to rehabilitate their housing projects, and it would go through a similar process. We would score them through the commission would help us in terms of scoring them and evaluating what projects would meet the most priorities for recommendation to mayor and council. And so that material is linked to in the chat. One recommendation I would have is either at the next meeting or the December meeting. Happy to invite if the commission would like the city manager's office and probably the assistant city manager, Liz Morales, to talk more about the tax initiative, just to make sure people are educated in terms of what's on it. But happy to answer any questions. Wanted to at least make sure you all were aware of those things.
Thanks, Anne. Any comments from the commission?
For me, thank you, Anne. I love that this is being put together and it focuses, there's movement and your hard work. Thank you. My comment.
Thanks, Mindy. Any other comments? All right, and any other HCD updates?
Nope, that's all. I think you'll hear from some staff later.
Sounds good. Thank you. Next up on the agenda is a presentation on PDSD corridor redevelopment tools and Plan Tucson update. Corin and Dan, y'all are up.
Great, thank you, Jay and commission members. We're excited to give you guys an update on what back in May we presented on as corridor redevelopment tools. And we now have kind of a project branding, which is our community corridor tools. And we're really excited to share more about this proposed tool to spur redevelopment of our corridors with a mix of uses, especially housing and affordable housing. So Dan is going to walk you through kind of where we're at with this proposal and give you a little overview and also share the timeline and alert you to some upcoming outreach events and community meetings where you can learn even more and share feedback. And we would really encourage many of you to attend. So Dan, do you want to present on this item?
Yep, I think I got it. Okay, great. Excellent. So yeah, no, thank you everyone for providing us the opportunity to come and talk to you on the community corridors and provide an update. So as Corin mentioned, yeah, we had presented to you kind of some of the background and kind of a progress update back in the spring. And we're getting really close to having a full code proposal, and we have some public outreach coming up in the near future, which we're really excited about. So what we're hoping to kind of go through here is to kind of provide a bit of a background and overview of kind of how we got to where we're at. Talk a little bit about, kind of housing costs, what we're seeing, what we've seen in other cities related to zoning reform and trying to address supply issues, why we're looking at corridors, and then kind of going through with some of those zoning tools that we're looking at to try to address some of the issues that we're seeing in the city of Tucson. Just real quick, this is a project that comes from direction from several different mayor and council study sessions. First of which was a study session with recommendations from this group, the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, on zoning reforms to help to incentivize affordable housing in the city of Tucson. Second one, there was a study session on tools for the redevelopment of underutilized sites. This was really looking at how do we use either declining commercial areas or vacant lots, parking lots, things of that sort, and get those to redevelop. We have lots of them on our commercial corridors. And how do we provide the correct tools and remove those barriers for that redevelopment to occur? The third one was a study session on building and zoning code regulations for tiny homes. This was all things tiny homes, talked about kind of shelter care uses as well as, the kind of smaller homes and what's technically defined as tiny homes. And some of that has been rolled into this as well, more of the permanent housing portion of that. And then we had a study session back in October to kind of pull all of that together. Actually, we also had then that was October 2023. We had another study session last month just to kind of give an update as well. And mayor and council told us to kind of move forward. So the goals of this tool are pretty simple.
I do see one hand up, so we can
Oh.
pause for a question if there's a clarification or question you have, Mindy.
It is.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to, I have a question about the study session on building and zoning code regulation for tiny homes and tiny home villages.
Yeah, of course.
I'm curious what the study session, what came out of that? What was the temperature on changing zoning so that my personal agenda is I believe the city needs to be investing in tiny home villages for the homeless, period. So that's the framework with which my question is coming.
Of course, yeah. So we basically were coming in there. We had been told by mayor and council to really provide an update on the different types of tiny homes and including the shelter care uses. What ended up coming out of there was actually the Amfi Housing First project that occurred, and then we went through and did that pad for that to be kind of a pilot program for it. Which was passed by mayor and council a handful of months ago, I think 2 or 3 months ago.
June, I believe.
Yeah, it was in June.
May or June, yeah.
And so additionally, they also, there's a Drockman study that also addressed some of that, and there are recommendations related to shelter care use that came out of that as well. This is really looking more at the permanent housing portion of it, at least with this, but that's what came out of that study session essentially.
Thank you.
Of course. For this project, for the community corridors tool, really the goal is to make infill, especially affordable housing, but all types of housing, easier to build along our corridors. So how do we remove those barriers, promote transit-oriented development and pedestrian-oriented development to support our climate goals, and really update our zoning to make sure that we're building a full spectrum of housing instead of the really small stuff and the big stuff, everything in between. And then looking at, just kind of simplifying our redevelopment process to help kind of move this type of development. So location criteria, this tool is really intended to be citywide, and looking at frontage on our arterial and collector roadways when you're in certain zones like commercial zones and office zones. For that, just a quick definition of underutilized sites and what we're really focusing on here is those parking lots, underused commercial properties, vacant lots that we see kind of throughout our city. One thing that we kind of noticed and when we first got started on here is really, how do we have lots and lots of plans that really guide us towards this type of development. But we don't see a lot of that really occurring outside of our kind of downtown core and kind of central areas. So we did a review of really all these different policy documents. In addition, we looked at the feedback that we received when developing those documents in order to really help guide us on this proposal and what we were looking into. So we looked at things like our Plan Tucson, our general plan. We looked at Move Tucson. We looked at the housing affordability strategy for Tucson, which has a lot of supportive goals of what we're doing here. As well as, other kind of plans and policies that we've had over the years, like our age-friendly action plan, Norte Sur, et cetera. We also looked at zoning tools that we have that also support this type of development, looked at the feedback that went into making those, but also really what we've learned from those. So we have a lot of kind of urban tools, such as our infill incentive district, our Sunshine Mile overlay, and our Grant Road overlay. And what have we learned from those that really helps to spur more kind of walkable urban development and transit-oriented development? And all that really came together and really kind of, showed us, one, that really what we're seeing develop with our zoning code isn't really aligning with our policies. But also that, that there's this real opportunity to make some changes to our zoning code to really start to really move that type of thing forward. Just to kind of frame this, and I know a lot of you are probably very kind of aware of a lot of this, but just to show kind of why it's necessary for to help to support this type of creation of new housing. One is, just we haven't seen a lot of multifamily and new housing development occur outside of downtown. So this is just kind of showing, the rising, cost of home ownership in the city in Tucson that's really occurred over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's that's really driving a lot of what we're trying to do is try to really start to see decreases in costs. So there's been a 180% increase in purchase price of the home over the last 12 years, and the average rent has nearly doubled in the last 9 years. So it is really created a big burden, as you all know, on residents of the city of Tucson with housing costs. Some of the kind of information and data that we started to pull when we started to really get an understanding of really what we're looking at, really looked at the impact of that rising costs of housing in the city of Tucson. And so what we have here is basically just looking at what do you need to make in order to afford a certain type of rental. So running from a studio with $36,000 to, a 3 or 4 bedroom for like a family at $75,000 and $88,000 respectively. And then looking at, just kind of, base, jobs and base and average salaries and median salaries for those. And as you can see, it's very challenging for a lot of these, like an elementary school teacher or a graphic designer, or even hairstylists and cashiers, to be able to really comfortably afford anything beyond like a studio or 1 bedroom, and in many cases can't even afford those. We also looked at home ownership and affordability, which is significantly more worse situation related to that. And looking at what you would need to make to really have an annual a 10% down payment versus a 3% down payment, and it was really $115,000 a year for an average home price in the city of Tucson, and then $123,000 a year for that 3%. And then you start looking at the salaries of just kind of our base of our kind of median workers, and you start to see that it's not even close to being attainable. What it does show you as well, and not to say that we don't want these professions in the city of Tucson, but these are the type of professions that can afford housing in the city of Tucson. Things like CEOs, lawyers, dentists, veterinarians, physicians. Those are really the professions that, at least as of now. So it really just shows the reason why and the impact of those rising costs, where we really need to address, a wide range of housing mixes for people, but also start to bring those costs down. Part of the solution is supply. There's other solutions as well, but this is one of the tools that we're starting to kind of try to look at. So kind of how did we get here? Tucson and surrounding communities are growing. we have seen the largest segment of our growing population is people that are 20 to 44. And the second largest is the age of 20 and younger. So as you start to see where the growth is occurring in the city of Tucson, these are people that either are looking for housing or will need housing as they move forward. So again, trying to figure out ways that we can provide them affordable housing as they move forward is very important. This is just an example of kind of permits in the MSA, and you really start to see, there was quite a bit of production happening in 2005, and then obviously, since then, we really haven't seen that production come back, and it's been pretty flat for the last almost 20 years at this point. So what is being built is also something that's kind of impacting a lot of this. This shows really the housing units that have been built. That are being built, and it's really single-family housing. Single-family is the most expensive form of housing, and that's pretty much what we're building, and we're building it on the periphery. So these are 1 to 4 units. There's some small multifamily, but we don't see a lot of that in the city anyways, and most of it really is on our edges here. There's a few 5 to 49 unit multifamily developments, but not a lot, and very few larger multifamily developments that really cluster in the downtown area. So what we're trying to do here is really just, we have too many people and we don't have enough housing. And you can do a couple things related to this. One of the things that we've done in the past is that we've just, drive to qualify. We've built on the periphery in order to kind of, make up for the housing needs of our community. And what that's really done is just created more and more sprawl, and it's made our urban heat island effect. It's really created a lot of environmental issues, and it's also created quality of life issues for people who have to commute from, the east side of Vail or whatever, or Marana or Oro Valley or, Saddlebrook or whatever. So the other way to do this, and this is what we're trying to do with here, is to start to provide more housing types within the city in infill, to really start to support people to be able to grow and live in the city, and really address both that and the environmental issues that we're dealing with in Tucson. So we have looked at other cities as well who have started to kind of see the results of this type of policy. This right here is kind of showing rent growth, and a couple case studies from LA and San Francisco, or not from LA and San Francisco, but from Minneapolis and some other communities, kind of looking at how their increase in homes has led to less of an increase in housing. So, places like Minneapolis, places like New Rochelle, New York, and Portland have had a significant increase in homes, but has led to less of an increase in rent growth. Similarly to the rest of the United States, with only a 3% increase, they've seen a large increase in those homes as well, or in increase in rents and rent growth. This right here kind of shows Minneapolis, and Minneapolis has been pretty successful as far as they have a similar kind of corridor program, and looking at kind of their percentage change of housing stock, average rent, and then what they've seen as far as even the impact on homelessness within Minneapolis. So you can see, this is, in comparison to Minnesota as a whole, they've had 12% increase in housing units versus 4%. The average rent change has only been 1% versus 14% for the rest of the state. And they've actually seen their homelessness go down 12% between 2017 and 2022, and compared to 14% increase for Minnesota. So again, looking at other places, and another example of this, you're seeing a lot of articles come out of Austin, Texas, who has also really kind of loosened up their zoning code to allow for additional housing, and they're starting to see prices go down in there. Phoenix is another one where they've had a lot of building that's occurred, and you're starting to see in the last 6 months or year some of those prices start to come back. Again, trying to address some of those issues via supply, via allowing for additional housing in those areas. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but why corridors? This is an example of, we did an analysis with, I think it's Echo Northwest. I say Eco Northwest, but I think it's Echo Northwest. Echo Northwest to look at our corridors for where there are opportunity sites, underutilized parcels, et cetera. And they really exist all throughout the city. So this shows kind of all of our corridors, there are a number of our corridors, and these are either sites with large parking lots, sites that are vacant, sites that are kind of declining, and they really occur all throughout the city. Additionally, it shows here parking lot acres. So every corridor has large amounts of parking that are just sucking up heat. They are leading to a lot of stormwater runoff and areas that just aren't being properly utilized. I mean, you can definitely see the big ones, which is like Park Place Mall and Tucson Mall, which have tons and tons of parking, but there's still lots and lots of underused parking throughout the city. So what is a corridor? Really for this, it's what is defined as an arterial or a collector in the city of Tucson. So things like Speedway Boulevard, Stone Avenue, but also, a collector like Pima or 6th Street would be considered a corridor. So it's again, throughout for the whole city, it's that's what we're looking at. Here are some kind of examples of underutilized sites. We're really tailoring this to work both in geographies all throughout the city, but also at different scales. So small sites all the way up to potential large sites like you have over here at Tucson. I believe that's Tucson Mall there. So one-off sites, some of our strip malls that are kind of declining, as well as vacant sites. So tools that really helped these places and these sites to redevelop. So pedestrian-oriented development is one of the things that we're really trying to do here. We think it's an opportunity for us to update our development code to allow for density of housing and commercial developments that will really enable both more units, but will help to kind of contain those housing prices. If we, what we're trying to do here is really build compact transit-oriented development that can give people that choice to walk, bike, or potentially use it. People still will probably, at least for a while, use cars, and some people will. But if they can use transit for 2 or 3, 2 or 3 days of the week, or for certain uses, we want to put it in a situation where they can utilize that. Our goal here really is to really take these benefits from infill and from this development. Things like reducing urban sprawl, reducing per capita energy use, lowering carbon emissions, preservation of natural landscapes, reduced water use. So as density increases, water use goes down, as well as limit urban heat island effect. We met with U of A and Lad Keith just to kind of talk a little bit about this proposal, and just kind of just the redevelopment of either a parking lot or a vacant lot which sucks up heat into something that has quite a bit of landscaping on the front, has a white roof or a cool roof, and limited amount of parking, can really significantly increase the kind of the heat issues within that certain area. So we feel that this is a good way to really start to address a lot of those heat issues that we see, especially along our corridors where it's there's not a ton of shade, and it's not a very welcoming environment. There are also economic benefits, as many of you know, but one, looking with incentives, we can create more affordable housing. We can optimize, our existing infrastructure versus building new infrastructure, and really kind of start to support and build that tax base in those areas for that. And then just in general, support of local businesses, more people to support commercial activity in those areas is really important. Real quick on this is kind of complex, but whatever. What we're trying to do here is really find that sweet spot, right? So this is only one of the pieces of it, like the public policy portion, which is zoning, density, and design requirements. But all of these things work together in order to allow for development to occur. So land cost, capital cost, and then overall market feasibility of what rents will support. But if you don't have this public policy piece in place, you won't get any sort of development, any sort of mixed use, new multifamily development, which is really the situation that we're seeing outside of our kind of urban areas and our kind of urban overlays. So what that basically tells us, and I mentioned this earlier, is that our zoning code does not align with the vision we've co-created. You can kind of see that in this image here. This is, so we have these existing tools. What we have here is that 56% of our multifamily housing has been developed within either the infill incentive district or one of our urban overlays, which accounts for less than 10% of the actual city size or city land area. 44% of that is outside of the those overlays. However, if you start to look at it closely, you realize that these big circles, 3 of the 5 are planned area developments. So they are they're not using the underlying zoning, they're using a special zoning that's flexible that you can kind of create your own standards. So what this is really telling us is that our zoning code is pretty much broken. It's not producing what we need it to produce. What is getting built? It's stuff like this. You know, drive-throughs, car washes, self-storage. Even the residential development that we're seeing, a lot of it is auto-oriented. It doesn't speak to the street. It doesn't provide the type of environment that that we really are looking for from our new development. So what we're trying to really do here is create something that, again, while we may be providing for the ability to have more intensity, it's something that really supports the community and is a better product in the end, and really leads to better corridors and a better environment for us and for Tucson as a whole. One thing that we did as we started to kind of realize that there are these issues is we went through and did a zoning analysis, and we identified a lot of barriers. So we've learned a lot from our overlays. We learned a lot from talking just to people in the development community because they see these every day. And then we did test scenarios. So Opticos helped us to do test scenarios related to this. And really the barriers are parking requirements, height maximums, density and lot coverage requirement regulations. I mean, these are pretty common all over the country. We have split zonings, which are really weird things in the city of Tucson, where there's residential in the back and then there's commercial, or there's multiple zones and you have to set back from each individual one, and it makes it really challenging. And then discretionary processes just kind of add cost, they add time, and they add a lot of uncertainty to process to the development process, which is really challenging. Ray, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question about this process of changing some of the zoning. I guess some of my fear always with this kind of development is continued displacement of people. And it seems like in a state that prohibits anything that limits the maximum profit of property owners, this is one place where my understanding is we do still have some leverage. We can't put in rent stabilization or inclusionary zoning overall. But as you're talking about some of these zoning changes, are you seeing that at all as part of how to be able to do things like require inclusionary zoning of like, yes, let's not take away all of the parking requirements just for everyone, but of like, we can make this so much easier, and with the commitment then of some forms of rent stabilization, some of the other things that are prohibited by the state, but that would really help to make the neighborhoods that people are living in then ones that they can stay in, and where people who, from the beginning, as you're showing, the teachers who can't afford to buy a house could actually afford to buy in some of these corridors.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying, it's kind of, you know, because this is an optional tool, you're right. We can't necessarily require any, you know, inclusionary policies and things of that sort for zoning. With the optional tool, what we're trying to do here, and this is what we've kind of done with our infill incentive district and other overlays, it does provide you that option to ask for some additional things. And a lot of this, what you'll see is that, you know, what we're trying to do is both reduce some of those barriers, but then also offer incentives for if you do provide affordable housing, if you do provide mixed use, if you do provide, you know, if you reuse kind of a building for adaptive reuse, One of the things that we're obviously, concerned about displacement related to development that occurs with that. One of the best tools for that is to not create it in one specific area, and it is really to do a citywide tool. So that's part of the reason why we're gonna take this tool and it's going to be able to be applied throughout. It tends to diffuse some of that, but it also doesn't just single out one place to where you have like a huge concentration of development. It tends to help with some of the displacement issues, and that's part of the reason why we've done this. So I think we're trying to balance kind of what the state allows us to do, also what the market will bear, because we do want market rate development as well. We really need all kinds of development and housing at this point. But I think this does provide that unique opportunity to really end up with a better product and something that's really more supportive of a lot of the things that we're trying to do here. Yes. Related to kind of some of the things that we are proposing for this. Location criteria for this would be frontage on an arterial or collector. It would be if you're in a commercial office or one of our office commercial residential zones or our like R3 residential zone, you would qualify for this and you'd be a site within that. It is not, if you're already in an overlay, which we've already kind of provided tools for this type of development, you wouldn't be able to utilize the tool. Same as our historic preservation zones and neighborhood preservation zones, et cetera. Those are mostly in downtown anyways, which is where we're already seeing a lot of this development occur, and where they already have those tools that kind of help with this type of thing. We are looking to encourage mixed use and mid-rise housing for it. The proposal is to, and this will be out next week, is to remove parking minimums, and where people would come in and have to just kind of have a statement on what their parking needs are and how they're meeting them. So it'd be the removal of parking minimums. It's really just we found when we did our analysis that for something to work in the market, it really only needs about 1 or 2 stories additional on what we already allow for. It's a little more building height, actual in feet, but as far as the original intent of like a C1 being a 3-story building, really only need a 4 or 5-story building to really make things work. So 1 to 2 stories based on the zone and development type, and then additional incentives for providing affordable housing or ground floor retail for those areas. Modify the density requirements. So density is an interesting thing because what ends up happening is you end up with larger, if you artificially restrain density, you end up with larger units than the community needs or whatever, because people build what the max they can do. So we're not suggesting any sort of density limits for this to help to encourage smaller units. Studios, 1 bedrooms, et cetera. Reduce setbacks. So having the building come to the front and really create that pedestrian environment, provide shade to the sidewalks that are right there, and really get that parking away from the front of the street. Tools to address split zoning and small scale housing on some of those residential portions to really transitions to existing neighborhoods. And then some tools for adaptive reuse. One of the things that we were really concerned about as well, as far as displacement, but also displacement of like small businesses. There's a lot of like small commercial along our corridors. So we want to provide tools to allow for small commercial to remain in place and to still be viable there throughout our corridors. And you'll see a lot of that, like if you go down First, you go down Stone, you go down, even 22nd, you go through a lot of our different corridors, you start to see that small scale commercial, and we want to make sure there's still tools so that can remain. In place for a lot of that, there are form standards that we're looking at. This is kind of what I was talking about, to where the optional tool allows for us to ask for more on things. So again, providing those pedestrian-oriented kind of sites, the public realm, making sure that it really addresses the street, that it's you're orienting the building to public spaces or to places where people are versus away from people or towards cars. looking at active and shaded ground floors, knowing that it gets quite hot in the middle of summer. So making sure that there's shaded areas to make sure that you can walk to transit if you need to, walk to other businesses, walk to residential. And then open space and public open space requirements, especially on larger projects. Looking for ways to provide, those surrounding areas with some public open space and making sure that it's incorporated. One of the other things that's really, we think is really important is that a lot of times when you get large scale development, it's just one big building block and it doesn't have that connectivity, especially it doesn't kind of incorporate the fabric of the existing development that's around it. So transition in scale and form, but also connections to existing neighborhoods and existing street networks to make sure that it's the proper scale and block scale as you go through. We did present this to at some public meetings in August. It was generally supportive feedback, the proposal for it. And I think there was a lot of, excitement about the promotion of new multifamily development and housing in general, encouraging transit and pedestrian-oriented development. And there was a lot of support for reducing parking requirements, if not removing parking requirements. There were concerns from, impact on neighborhoods, increased building heights, and some environmental concerns related to this that we did hear from that, which is kind of, we've heard from other projects that we've done, and we've heard in the past as well. But as of now, we are finalizing kind of what the code looks like. We're getting ready next week. We're planning to release public draft of the tool for public review. And then we're looking at an in-person public meeting on the 30th of October at TCC, and then a virtual meeting the following week on the 4th for this. From there, we'll take the feedback, we'll make any revisions that need to be made, and we're looking at Planning Commission in November for the study session, ultimately public hearing in December, and then bringing it to Mayor and Council for adoption early in 2025. And my slide is wrong, I apologize. Any additional questions? I know that was a lot.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions or comments from the commissioners?
If it's possible to get the slides posted to to review. Thanks for bringing some of the spatial analysis was really interesting. I think bring our attention to the 1 to 4 unit developments and where that was happening in the city. So I appreciate that information coming.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mindy.
On 4th Avenue and 5th Street, there was a restaurant that had been there forever, Plush or Sweetwater Cafe before that, and they put in a pretty large apartment complex with a storefront on the ground level that has never been rented. And so just my wheels are turning in my head a little about developers coming in and building all of these structures and not ever filling them with activity. And it bothers me. And I'm wondering if there's a way to incentivize people who build, for example, the 4th Avenue, 5th Street monstrosity, to incentivize them to get businesses in there or people. Then on the end of 4th Avenue, where O'Malley's used to stand, is this ginormous development, no green space. I know that these are all so I just wonder if there's any punitive action that could be enforced on not getting places rented, just stay barren. And
So Mindy, that's actually, it's something that is a concern, right? There's already too much commercial space or retail space in the city of Tucson. And that's part of the reason why you start to see the decline in some of these areas. And a lot of that, so that's part of the reason why we aren't requiring ground floor retail or ground floor commercial with this, is because we don't want to force people to do it and then it end up being vacant. We feel that if we provide an incentive for doing so, generally those developers would be the ones that really, one, design it properly, which you see sometimes doesn't happen, but also would be ones that are really putting it in there so they can have have a commercial space that's in there. What we've seen I've seen this in other communities is that there'll be a requirement for ground floor commercial. They'll build it and it'll just remain vacant and they'll use it for, kind of exercise equipment or whatever. So we're trying to get away from that instead of just forcing them to do that, use it through the incentive. I will say, as you start to build density, you have more and more people who can actually frequent those businesses and support those businesses. So in the long term, it does really help to support more of those businesses being used. But yeah, it's a challenging situation.
Maggie?
Hi, Dan.
Maggie.
Can you tell me again what is a collector, and then a collector corridor or whatever? And also, this looks really, really cool. And I think, is there anything that we need to take into consideration for ownership models or units?
Yeah, Maggie, no, thank you. So a collector, so arterials are like the really big streets like Speedway, Grant, Oracle, 22nd, 12th. The collectors are the ones that I think actually have a much better scale, and could potentially be the really like great pedestrian streets. So that would be like Pima, Tucson, Columbus, Rosemont, is that right? Yeah. So those are the collectors. I will say there's not as much commercial activity along our collectors, and you would have to utilize the tool. You'd have to have a commercial zone that fronts the actual or R3 that fronts the actual street. But what you see it at the intersections of collectors and other collectors, or collectors and arterials. And those are actually really interesting spaces. So I think there's some real cool opportunities for this tool to be utilized in those places. And then your second one was related to ownership, right? Okay, yeah. So we do, one of the things that we're building into this is that on a split zone site where there's residential R1 or R2 in the back, and there's a lot of situations like this where it's commercial, and then there's this back portion that used to be utilized for parking, and then we basically prohibited that in our zoning code like 30 years ago, and they're either parking lots or they're vacant. We're looking to allow for a multitude of different types of housing that would be smaller scale ownership model. So looking at tiny homes, looking at townhomes, duplexes, threeplexes, things like that, that would really allow for kind of smaller scale ownership models on those. Another thing is that it doesn't preclude you from also having ownership or condos with the normal kind of development. I know that's we don't have a really strong condo market here in the city of Tucson, but there is that possibility as well.
Thank you.
Kenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that reminded me. Is there a concise reason for why there is so much split zoning? And with how has that come to be? And with the new tools, it doesn't seem to be changing that underlying the zoning or anything like that, but perhaps a workaround around it. So just curious about that piece.
Yeah, so as far as I can tell, there were two things. One is that I think in the past, they were able to utilize that residential portion for parking. So it was almost like a buffer from the neighborhood to where, you could use it for some of those ancillary uses, but you wouldn't have the full commercial development there. So you see some of that. You also see as some of our corridors have expanded, You have the commercial portion, and then there's what was probably intended to be part of the neighborhood right behind it, but it just never developed. So I think between those two is why you see a lot of it. And you see a lot of it from a certain time period. Once you get further out east, really east of Wilmot, you don't see much of it. But it's really in that Midtown section. There's a lot of it on Speedway. There's a lot on Broadway. You see a bunch on like 22nd as well.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Go ahead, Ray.
I am thinking about Mindy's comment there about vacant lots, and sometimes, right, that it isn't only a question of places being built. I know of other commercial places downtown, like where Shot in the Dark used to be. I think that one's still vacant after they tripled the rent and then have left it vacant for years. And I guess that's really where I would strongly encourage that if we're giving any kind of relief of some of the requirements, which I certainly support doing, that those come with contingencies, that they come with the requirement that they're rented out, the requirement that they're rented out at affordable rates, like really looking at like what's the city that we want to live in, and how are we using our zoning tools to create that. My fear of making some of these changes without that is like we're giving up some of the power that we have as a city, since there's so few other places under current state law that we can use that power. That even though, like, yeah, I want to reduce parking requirements, honestly, I would be hesitant to give that up as a blanket thing, without really utilizing it to leverage some form of control. Yeah, especially around affordability. Thank you.
Anybody else have comments? Before we move on, I have a comment. I guess I'm one of the things that I struggle with as a commissioner is, obviously when we're talking about, housing and development and equity, there are just so many pieces to the puzzle. It's really hard to keep them all straight. And I know that, this seems like just the way that the city is developed. Clearly the zoning along the corridors is broken and needs to be changed. So I think, overall, I think this is great, but, how does this fit with revising the zoning code overall? Because, that, or, there's Norte Sewer, right, which is bus rapid transit. I mean, all of these things really need to work together, or else you get these things like vacant storefronts because there's not the population density, to support the commercial stuff. So I guess I'm just wondering, what else is happening aside from the corridor proposal that we're looking at? I mean, how does that fit in with, looking at zoning within neighborhoods, or, more transit oriented development, or just more transit period? So just kind of, thinking a little bit more expansively about how this corridor project fits into kind of the larger scheme of what's going on throughout the city.
Yeah, so we do have other efforts going on as well. As you likely know, the middle housing bill that was passed by the state legislature, that we have to come into compliance with by January 1st, 2026. As we move from kind of working on corridors, we're going to start looking at that. And I think what that's going to end up doing, it's an opportunity to really look at our residential code and start to look at how that, where are there opportunities, and there are quite a few opportunities within our residential code as well, to really make adjustments to really, again, start to really support not just transit on our corridors, but also how those neighborhoods support the corridors that are changing for that. We have been coordinating with Norte Sewer on this. I think all of these tools would be very supportive of that project. There may need to be station area planning that leads to even more intensity where those stations are, just to make sure that right by the transit stops you have more housing that's even than would even be allowed here. But we are definitely working and coordinating with all of, with those other departments and efforts that are going on. I think it's what we've seen elsewhere in a lot of cases is that wholesale zoning code changes are really challenging. This happened in Austin where they spent years on Code Next, and then it kind of, it basically went up in flames and crashed. They ended up starting to do kind of incremental changes where they've targeted where the biggest pain points were, and it's been pretty successful. So I think that's a really good strategy. I think there's going to be policies that come out of Plan Tucson as well that'll help as well to support more of this. So I think this is the beginning. There's still a lot that needs to happen, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for change with this effort and what we're trying to do here.
Thanks, Dan. And just to kind of follow up on that, we at our Equitable Housing Strategies subcommittee meeting this week, Bill Mackey from the Drachman Institute talked to us about the report that they put together that I guess was requested by mayor and council, or maybe just some council members, looking at zoning. And a few things really stuck out to me, and I actually think we should have him as a mission. But I mean, he was basically like, essentially nothing can be developed in the city of Tucson at this point because the zoning code essentially doesn't allow it, aside from, like you presented, some areas where, out in the burbs, you can still build some single family homes, but the zoning code was that broken, which I just found really shocking, honestly, that he put it that way. The other thing that I guess I'm wondering about, and that Bill touched on, and I guess presented to mayor and council as well, is this idea of declaring a housing emergency. And I guess where I'm going with that is, what kind of time frame do you think we're looking at before, if it were to come to fruition, when it would happen? Again, just thinking about, how long it would take to make these changes and then actually start to see building. I mean, it's so far out, and we have such a crisis right now. So, it's like, obviously all things need to be on the table, but, just kind of thinking about what the timeline might be for the project, and then for it to, see some fruit bared in terms of new development. I know that's probably looking into your crystal ball, but
Yeah, I think it's hard to determine exactly kind of what the impact of something like this would be. I will say, we're hoping for January, February to have something adopted by mayor and council. Then you start to think about, there's the design process, the permitting process, and then the construction of all of that. So you really won't, it may be a couple of years down the road before you start to see some of this development occurring. But that's also, development that probably couldn't have happened, or that would have previously had to go through some sort of rezoning or some other process that would have made it even longer to get it there. So I'm not entirely sure. I think there's also going to have to be an educational element to where we reach out to, people in the community and developers in the community and let them know kind of that this is available, but what this is kind of how you utilize the tool. And that's really important. But yeah, I'm not sure if I can give you an exact answer, but that it definitely is something that, is a little ways down the road before you start to really see it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'll just make a final comment, just kind of a personal comment. As the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, really centering equity, it seems like, we've been on the path of becoming less equitable, more unequitable, over the past few years, as your presentation really showed us. And, just really thinking about, as a commission and just really as a city in general, this seems like it will maybe get us back down to where we were, 10, 15 years ago, just through development. But, if you look back when things were maybe quote unquote more equitable, people that were low income or working folks still had trouble affording housing. It's not like we were in some golden age where, everybody had access to affordable housing. And we're getting back to that. It's like we've never been there. So, I just want to kind of put out there to the commission as well, that I think this doesn't necessarily address the real affordability issues that, particularly very low income people face, and that's still an issue, and that doesn't really have anything to do with this project, which I think is great, but just kind of wanted to put that out there for folks. So any other comments or questions from the commission? All right, anything else from you, Dan or Corin?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you both for the work.
Thank you all for the feedback. Really good discussion, and we appreciate the input. We will share invitations to those community meetings when that goes out later today or tomorrow probably. Also want to just give a quick update on the ADU code amendment, one of the other state bills that was passed earlier this year. We've been making some updates to our regulations around accessory dwelling units, and that will be going to mayor and council for a public hearing on Tuesday of next week. And then another code amendment, also driven by state legislation, that we are working on is for adaptive reuse of what they're calling obsolete commercial buildings. So it's designed to spur redevelopment of those, office buildings, which we see more and more of since COVID, especially they're not being used. This would allow for redevelopment of those structures without any discretionary processes, so no approvals from mayor and council or planning commission, through an administrative process, a by right process, and would require that if it was redeveloped with multifamily use, 10% of those units be set aside as affordable housing. So we're working on integrating that into our code, and that will be going to Planning Commission for a study session next week. And then we'll be going to Mayor and Council before the end of this year. So a few other code amendments related to housing that I wanted to mention to you all.
Thanks, Corin, appreciate it. And thanks, Dan, for the presentation. It was great. If there are no other questions or comments, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan, better known as PCHIP. That's you, Lena.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm here just to give a brief presentation, an update on the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so basically I'm here tonight just to, again, give that overview of the PCHIP draft. It's scheduled for Mayor and Council on October 22nd, so next week on Tuesday. And I also will just go over the proposed grant making process at the end of the presentation. Tonight we're hoping just if there's any final feedback on the plan, and if there would be a possible motion by the commission to recommend adoption by Mayor and Council next week. The draft is available, the one that Mayor and Council will be viewing next week on the PCHIP website, which I think Rachel will drop in the chat. So again, this People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan, it was first adopted by Mayor and Council on January 20th, 2021. And at that point, it helps guiding the city's allocation of funding from HUD and general fund dollars that Mayor and Council dedicates to human service programs. The second edition of PCHIP will also be HCD's strategic departmental plan for the coming 5 years. So PCHIP will provide high-level strategy across departmental programming areas, regardless of that funding source. Our programmatic areas include building and operating housing, providing housing assistance, solving homelessness, and investing in community. And the people, as I said, it's our strategic priorities and goals for the department over the next 5 years. And we decided to keep it as People, Communities, and Homes, because at the heart of what this plan and HCD's work, there are those 3 interconnected areas of people, communities, and homes. So thriving individuals and families, vibrant and inclusive neighborhoods, and a stable and affordable home. And so HCD aims to create equitable pathways to opportunity by ensuring that all individuals, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances, experience dignity, belonging, and the ability to thrive. And so we see a critical step towards equitable opportunity is providing a safe, quality, affordable home. And additionally, this path encompasses more than just housing. It extends to the essential services that people need to thrive and the characteristics of our communities that support us collectively. And so I'm just going to quickly just go over the plan structure if you read or have read the document. So the first chapter is just the introduction that kind of goes over that pathway to opportunity framework, and a brief overview of HCD and how the plan was developed. The second chapter goes into current conditions and challenges, so providing a Tucson at a glance of current data, and then going into kind of the top challenges that came out of our community outreach portion. So looking at affordable housing, poverty, homelessness, community safety, and health. And then chapter 3, going over different goals, objectives, and actions that we've decided to outline based off the feedback and the data that we've collected. There's also a number of cross-cutting principles that we have listed that go over the entire plan altogether that we think hit on all of the goals, objectives, and actions in the plan. And then the last chapter, chapter 4, focuses on that P-CHIP grant making, just stating the process and the funding sources for that. And then lastly, we have some appendices, just a glossary of key terms, our full community stakeholder and engagement summary, and just the endnotes of all of our sources. So you all have heard this before, so I'll quickly just go over our outreach with our community and our stakeholders. Many of you participated. So again, we've been doing these monthly updates at the commission. We had our community survey that had 479 responses from community members. We had various P-CHIP kickoffs in person and on Zoom. We were at city and community events like Ward 1's Dia de la Niñas. And we held 12 focus groups. One example was our focus group with those with lived experience of homelessness. So all of this information that we collected during this outreach period, we wanted to make sure whatever we were hearing from the community also matched up with our data. So what the plan trends said are, we said, the community says that one of the top challenges in Tucson is the lack of affordable or attainable housing, and that really does match up with what the data says. Median home prices have increased in Tucson from 2017 to 2024 by 86.4%. Median rents have increased in Tucson and during that same period by 66.4%. And the share of renters who are housing cost burdened in 2022, as of 2022, are about 51.1%. And then the second biggest challenge that the community sees is homelessness. And that is also what we see in the data. There's about 126.2 increase in unsheltered homelessness from 2018 to 2024. And these are kind of going off our point in time count numbers, which we know are an undercount of the actual issue. So from there, we also wanted to make sure that we have all these great plans that we're doing here in housing and community development, but in Pima County and across the city. And we wanted to make sure that our plans are in alignment. So in the affordable housing strategy for Tucson, which Mayor and Council adopted in December of 2021, it addresses the production and preservation of housing units. And that's a key focus under P-CHIP. So there's different goals, objectives, and actions that are connected to or come from HAST. We've marked them with that HAST icon. That's that like peach-looking circle at the top. P-CHIP also incorporates HCD's commitment to implement policies from the Prosperity Initiative adopted by Mayor and Council in January 2024. And so just like HAST, we have an icon for the Prosperity Initiative that is marked where different goals, objectives, and actions also connect to or come from the Prosperity Initiative themselves. And HCD has worked very closely with the Plan Tucson team at PDSD to make sure that the P-CHIP update and the Plan Tucson update are in sync and reflect one another. So making sure all those are in line and included. And then briefly, I'll just go over our P-CHIP grant making. So again, city departments and nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply for funding to support activities that achieve our P-CHIP goals. Each call for project released under the plan will include a scoring criteria to help committees evaluate and prioritize proposals in alignment with P-CHIP based on the current data needs. And so this is our proposed process for the grant making period that will be coming up. So we'll have our call for projects. After that, we'll have a threshold review, a community review panel, an equity and impact analysis, and then preliminary recommendations for mayor and council to consider, and then mayor and council approval. Right now, it is expected that the call for projects will open sometime in November after mayor and council adopt PCHIP, with applications then being due sometime in January of 2025. We will have more specifics on this grant making piece in the coming weeks after the plan adoption, so we'll keep you updated on that. And that's all I had for today. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, if possible, we're looking for if the commission would give a recommendation for adoption by mayor and council. Yes, Mindy.
Make a motion that the PCHIP draft be approved and by this commission and forwarded to mayor and council.
Mindy, if I could, what I just jotted down real quick, I think Lena was asking for a recommendation for adoption by mayor and council from the commission.
Okay, whatever it is, yes, please do it.
Do I have a second?
This is Vicky. I'll second.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, Mindy. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Those, oh, sorry, Hel. Those opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion passes.
Thank you all so much. And yes, we'll keep you guys updated as it gets adopted next week, hopefully. And then the call for projects for the grant making after that.
Thanks so much, Lena.
Thank you.
Moving right along, the next item on the agenda is the Pima County Housing Commission updates. This is for updates from the Pima County Housing Commission representative, and I have no idea. Do we have a representative here with us today to give us an update on the Pima County Housing Commission?
Jay, this is Ernesto. There was a county representative in the meeting, but I don't see her in the meeting.
Okay.
Her name is no, there's nobody from the county.
All right. Seeing that there is no update from the County Housing Commission, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the subcommittee updates. First up is the Affordable Housing Subcommittee.
I think I'm the only member. This is Maggie. We did not have a meeting.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. Next up is Equitable Housing Strategies, and that is me. We met on Tuesday, actually, and had a really good meeting, as I mentioned earlier. We had Bill Mackey and Greg Beach from the Drachman Center at the University of Arizona come to present their report on zoning that they did for mayor and council and have presented to mayor and council. And it was a very, very informative presentation, and we had a lot of good discussion about it. I mentioned a couple of things, but just a little bit more context. The study was originally supposed to focus on micro shelters and mini homes, tiny homes, those kinds of developments to see, basically if they could be built in the city of Tucson. And the study expanded to look at zoning in a more comprehensive manner. And as I mentioned, basically one of the main takeaways is that it's just really hard to do any kind of development in Tucson at all because of the zoning code. So, there are developers out there that, would potentially build, but just due to the zoning code and other barriers, just really can't get over the hump to get anything built. The other reason that I wanted them to present to the subcommittee was because they did present it to mayor and council, and really they're suggesting a need to make a wholesale change to the zoning code. And they suggested declaring a housing emergency to help move this process along, with just because of the serious nature of it and how much it's holding back development in Tucson. And he noted as well, again, from an equity perspective, that people with the largest need in our community have the least access to what they need, whether it be services or housing, and really made a connection to how the zoning code essentially creates that paradigm. So, as we look towards maybe addressing the issues with the zoning code, really, I think having an equity lens as we look at it would probably be a good idea. So that was just some updates from the presentation that we received, and we also had Larice Walker, the head of the City of Tucson's Office of Equity, with us for the meeting, and she gave some updates. They are working on an equity action plan. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that they are bringing that back in-house. They had a consultant working on it who got it quite far down the road, but they felt like they needed to do some reworking and wordsmithing to bring it up to kind of where they wanted it to be. So that is coming up. Also, they do have a pretty robust mapping tool right now to really show where access to opportunity exists in the city. So some good things happening there. I think it would probably be worth having the full commission review the mapping stuff that they're doing over there, because I do think it provides a framework or baseline for measuring equity, as we have talked so much about, as both in the subcommittee and as a full commission. That is what I remember and what I gather from my notes for our subcommittee meeting. Is there anybody else on the Lori, Kenny, Ray, that anything that I missed? Anything else that stuck out from our meeting? If not, I will pass it on to the Housing First Subcommittee.
Hi, this is Lindsay. Did you go to the meeting? Because I wasn't at the last one.
Pardon?
Mindy, I think she was asking you if you were at the last meeting, because Wendy said she wasn't there.
Yes, I was, Wendy. Just
Perfect.
to check for a second. Jay, you had just mentioned about getting Bill Mackey and the Jackman Institute's work in front of the commission, and I would like to, I don't know if I need to make a motion, or I would like to see them be on the agenda for next month.
I think we have a pretty packed agenda for next month, so I think any additional presentations that we would want to have would probably be December at the earliest. But I hear you, and I will work with Bill and Greg if Greg wants to come as well to present to the full commission.
The Housing First, Tisha is not here. Mark is not here, and I did not take minutes or notes to track what we talked about in the meeting. And I truthfully cannot remember what we discussed. And
I can jump in, Mindy. This is
Thank
Ernesto.
you. Thank you.
So the Housing First Committee in September received a presentation from Brian Benz
Right.
from the Holistic Transformation.
Thank you.
And Brian is working with a church, Bethel Community Baptist Church, to build 12 tiny homes. Pretty much a lot of it from volunteers, but they are spending some money, of course. And that was his presentation. It will be staffed. There will be a service support staff And I can put the item into the chat, or rather the presentation in the chat. And unless the commission would like to hear from him at a future date.
Thank you, Ernesto.
Mhm.
Brian is building shipping container homes
Correct.
for
Correct.
children aging out of foster care.
Mhm.
And in his presentation, it's pretty striking data that youth aging out of foster care within 4 years, 5 years are become homeless themselves. There's just not enough supports. So they're building shipping container, 1-bedroom homes
Mhm.
where employment will be emphasized. So, and I think we had him coming in to see the alternative ways of getting things built quickly for people. Thanks, Ernesto, for having
Welcome.
Hey, Mindy or Ernesto, do
Mhm.
y'all remember, did he talk about any challenges or what challenges they have faced in terms of getting a tiny home or smaller home development built? Do you guys remember that?
I do. I had met with him the prior week for a few hours, just talking about who they are, what they're doing. It's money. Sorry, my cats are playing. Getting funding to build the shipping container homes. And they have a parking lot that belongs to the church where they could do their first go around. Finding land to build them on is a huge challenge, and at a cost where they, as a church, cannot alone fund them. Yes.
Was the zoning of the church property allowing them to have some of the tiny homes on the property? It sounds like that it was.
It's a good question. They only had one built, and I think they're still waiting for getting approval and permits, and I would have to ask Brian
Got
to
it.
answer that.
Got it. Anything else from the Housing First Subcommittee?
Just one, I think that we had asked the commission if they were curious about seeing any of the other presentations that were at the Housing First. One from Rachel Milne up in Phoenix, who has a sanctioned campground. We had Joe from the Homing Project, who's using pallet micro homes. And they'll be up in December. I'm trying to remember, there was Brian. Can't remember the other one. The commission was directed to watch those videos or the recordings of those meetings. And I don't know if anybody did. And if you see me, don't make fun of me. Rachel. Yeah. That's it. Did anybody look at the videos or watch our subcommittee about the different people who presented? No. Okay. It's all right. I'll keep poking the bear. So.
Thanks, Mindy. Moving along to our next agenda item, next steps. So the next commission meeting is November 14th from 4 to 6. As I mentioned, we do already have a relatively packed agenda. Maxine Becker, Director of Strategic Collaborations with the Arizona Bar Association, will be giving us a presentation about the state of evictions and what the Arizona Bar Association is doing in terms of addressing that issue. And we will also have a presentation on the state of housing in Arizona, which is a report from the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability, better known as ARCHES. And then we will have our regular agenda items as well. Neto, is there any update on the facilitation or potential facilitators?
No, Jay, don't have an update on that.
Okay, thank you. And then we have our upcoming subcommittee meetings, Housing First, Tuesday, October 29th from 4 to 5:30. Equitable Housing Strategies, Tuesday, November 19th from 1 to 2:30. And Affordable Housing is Wednesday, November 20th from 4 to 6 p.m. And our December 5th commission meeting will be hybrid. So those are the next steps that I see on the agenda. One of the other things that I have been thinking about, and just kind of want to put out there to the commission is obviously we're able to, do some more kind of hands-on digging in during our subcommittee meetings, but I would like to try and build more of that into this meeting as well, because I feel like, we get a lot of information and a lot happens, and we don't really have a chance to always dig in and kind of process the information and think about what we want to do with it and how we want to advise mayor and council. So, obviously, I've already booked up the November commission meeting, so we won't have a chance to do that. But maybe as we get into the new year, we can think more about that. Hopefully, we will have facilitators working with us as well, and we can circle back to the strategic planning that we did this past February that we seem to be getting farther and farther away from and not really centering in our work going forward. So those are just a few things that I wanted to share with folks, just kind of what I've been thinking about in terms of where we go as a commission. Are there any other things that folks would like to see as next steps or discuss as we talk about next steps? Serena, do you have your hand up? No, that just looks, is that somebody's hand up, or is that just a little cursor that I see? Oh, that's me. Never mind. We are good, guys. I think we did a great job getting through the meeting today with a little bit shorter time frame. Thanks for rescheduling and making the meeting today since we were not able to meet quorum whenever it was we were not able to meet quorum. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jay. Great job.